Hello, and thanks for joining me for a little workshop on wild foraging in the Pacific Northwest, one of my favorite activities. This presentation is all about berries, mushrooms, and various green things. All the pictures in the presentation are mine, except where otherwise noted. So before we dive into things that you can eat, I thought it would make sense for us to talk a little bit about things that you cannot. Things that in fact are quite poisonous and toxic that you can find in the Pacific Northwest. And so the first of which, these are two different plants within this group, nightshades. And the picture on the right in the upper part of the presentation, this is a picture of the deadly nightshade. So deadly nightshade is the common name, and A. belladonna, so that's the genus abbreviated, and the species name is here. And so you can see the berries here are dark blue, almost black in color, or purple, almost black in color. And then you have these kind of bell-shaped violet-colored flowers. In contrast, the bittersweet nightshade, so here's our common name. This is the abbreviation for the genus, and this is the species, so this more specific than the genus. And that picture is here. And this one's pretty common, actually. I've seen this one on Mercer Island. I see it in a lot of parks in Seattle. And the berries, when they're ripe, are red, and when they're not ripe, they're green, yellow, going into orange, kind of like a tomato, right? When it's not ripe, it's green, and then as it's turning red, it kind of goes through the color change. And this one is going to be more common. I've seen this one more often. And in both of those cases, the berry itself is really toxic. So it can cause actual shutdown of your liver and your kidneys within hours of consumption, depending upon how much you consumed. And so really important to identify all plants and mushrooms correctly before consuming them. These are ones you would certainly not want to consume. Arguably the most toxic plants are these two in the Northwest, and for mushrooms, these two. And so on the left-hand side, we have the death cap, very appropriate common name. The genus is Amanita phalloides, is the species. And there are some characteristics that are unique to this Amanita group of mushrooms. One of those is this bulb, which is going to be underneath the ground, but it's at the bottom of the stem or the stipe of the mushroom. And that's not unique just to Amanita group, but all Amanita mushrooms do have a bulb. Another thing that they all have is a veil. You can kind of see it here underneath the cap or the hat of the mushroom. And with the death cap, there's almost like a yellowish tinge or coloration that you can see in the photo. The destroying angel, another appropriate name here for the common name, which is Amanita ocreata. So ocreata is a species, Amanita is that genus group. On the right-hand side, you can see it's really just stark white. Like this mushroom is truly white. It's not buff, it's not tan. It doesn't have this yellow hue. It's pretty white, but you can see the bulb. It's hard to see in this photo, but there is a veil. And so again, other characteristics that are true to this Amanita group, including true gills, which are a little harder to see in this picture, but you can see the gills, distinct gills here, which again, gills are characteristic of many groups of mushrooms, not just Amanita, but all Amanita mushrooms have a bulb. They all have a veil. They all have true gills. So let's learn about some things that we can eat, which, by the way, these two really, really toxic both to people and dogs. So these ones especially, you would need to have care immediately if they were ingested. So again, just a little plug to make sure that you always correctly ID anything you find in the wild before consuming. All right, berries. This is exciting. There are no poisonous compound berries in Washington state, which is pretty cool. So when I say compound, I'm talking about an aggregate berry. And so a common example that you may be familiar with would be a blackberry, a raspberry, a thimbleberry, a salmonberry. We'll look at some of these examples with pictures in a little bit. There are many edible single berries in Washington. Some are easy to identify, and others maybe, would require a little more practice out in the field. So some things to maybe start with would be huckleberries. And huckleberries are in this group called Vaccinium, and they're in that group with bilberries and blueberries, and there are lots and lots of species. So it's okay to not know which species of huckleberry you have, and in fact, even accomplished berry foragers often don't know which one, but if you know it's a huckleberry, if you know it's Vaccinium as that group, the genus, then you know it's going to be safe to eat. So never eat a berry that you have not properly identified, unless maybe it's a compound berry, because again, there are no poisonous compound berries in Washington, as long as you know it's compound. Okay, so trailing blackberry, this one is really fun. They're very, very sweet. So unlike the invasive Himalayan blackberry, which we have all over Seattle and all over Mercer Island and all over everywhere, trailing blackberries are smaller. The blackberry themselves, they are smaller and sweeter. And the vines, they're just a little more compact. They're called trailing because you kind of find them trailing along the trails in the woods near the ground. They're kind of creeping. It's a low trailing shrub. They have alternating leaves, and they have 3 leaflets. So if you look in the picture, when I say leaflet, I'm talking about like here's 1, 2, and 3. And when I talk about alternating leaves, I'm talking about this thing, right, is going to alternate with another one of these that has the 3 leaflets on it. When we look at the actual shrub itself. And so in this picture on the right, this is a picture of me with, these are Vaccinium. So this is a huckleberry. This is the red huckleberry. There's some red huckleberries in here. The orange ones, these are called salmonberries. And the dark ones that are compound berry, those are the trailing blackberries. So salmonberries and thimbleberries. Salmonberries can range in color. They're kind of fun. Sometimes you find them almost ombre. And so on one end, they'll be more yellow and then they fade into red or purple. They are the first to really start popping in the spring. And so that's a fun one to start harvesting right away. They're gonna be before the thimbleberries start showing up. And thimbleberries fall apart really easily. I don't have much success picking them and then saving them for later. You really just kind of have to pick and eat as you go. Some other berries are easier to transport home and wash and process and freeze if you want, or make into jam. Thimbleberries kind of fall apart. The leaves of a thimbleberry are called the Charmin of the forest. So if you ever find yourself lost in the woods, this is the leaf in the picture here in the middle. It's really big and really soft, like toilet paper. So, we say leave no trace, but if you were in a tight spot and you needed some TP, there you go. So Charmin of the forest. So salmonberry on the left, you can kind of see they're glossy. They have a shiny look to them. Thimbleberries do not. They are motte looking. So even when they're ripe, they have kind of a more motte look. So Blackcap raspberries. Their fruit is dark purple when ripe. They're also motte, not shiny. So if we compare this picture, right, like here or here, and we go back to our trailing blackberry, you can see the shininess here on the berries. These are shiny. And we're gonna go forwards to the blackcap, not shiny, right? It's pretty flat or motte. So it's a shrub, the thorny branches, those leaflets again with the 3. And because it's a compound berry, you know that it is edible. Huckleberries, these are a single berry, meaning there's just the one berry. And so there are so many species. 15 or more. I mean, I've heard people say like 18 species. I think it depends on your definition of the Pacific Northwest. Like, are you talking about like all the way up to Alaska? Are you talking about as east as, Montana? Like, what is your range? But when we say Vaccinium, so that's our genus here, Vaccinium, we're really talking about huckleberries, blueberries, and bilberries. And the colors are very vast. You know, you can have, this one's not quite ripe yet. This is actually a red huckleberry, but it's pink when it first starts developing. And so it's going to turn more red. You can eat it here. It's just going to be a little tart. And then you have colors that are like more blue, like kind of like a blueberry. You have this kind of purplish color. Sometimes you'll find huckleberries that are almost black. They're really dark and they range in size. Sometimes they're really tiny and sometimes they're big. And again, it depends on the species, but they are edible. Oregon grape, this is kind of a fun one. Some people eat it. You can eat it right, like fresh, right off of this stem. I've never done that. I guess I could try one time. I've always harvested this and I've made like a jam, and I haven't made a jam just with Oregon grape. I'll mix it with some other types of berries that are really sweet. I hear that Oregon grape by itself is pretty tart, a little bit bitter, but I haven't tried to make a jam with just Oregon grape, so I can't speak to that myself. But you have, as you can see here, so this branch here goes with the Oregon grape. It's a low-lying shrub, and it has alternate leaves. They have teeth on them, so these like leaflets, right? There are 9 to 19 total. So here's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We could count them all the way down. And there would be 9 to 19 total. And they each have these spiny teeth. They're kind of jagged edged on the sides. And the berries are blue, as you can see in the picture. Some of these berries you can see are kind of shriveled and dry. This is a photo from this year. It was a pretty dry summer. And so, you know, I wouldn't recommend eating those ones, but some of them you can see are more plump. So like this one and this one and this one, and you can just pull off the ones that look good. Sometimes to save time, I'll just cut the whole stem and then I'll kind of process it later. But you can see on the right, and also Oregon grapes grow in the same kind of environment that you find chanterelle mushrooms, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But this is a chanterelle mushroom basket of mine. In the lower right, you can see a couple in there. And on the left, this is my full basket, Oregon grape, and these are blueberries on the right. Okay, so just a fun little thing. This is not wild, but there is a really cool blueberry park. It's down in Tacoma, so a little bit of a drive, but if you have an opportunity this coming summer, so the season is kind of over now, but this coming summer, here's the address. It is a free blueberry park. There are thousands, and when I say thousands, I mean 3,372 as of the last count, blueberry bushes. So many blueberries. It is a unique history. So it's a former farm that was actually purchased by Tacoma School District and traded to Metro Parks Tacoma. They don't use any pesticides or fertilizers, so safe to eat like right off of the bush, or you can pop them in your basket. The picking, there's no limit, right? So you want to be kind of mindful of other people that are there. That being said, and also animals, right? Birds like to eat the berries too. There are so many bushes that I honestly, I'm never worried when I go that there aren't going to be any berries. I mean, there are millions of berries every time I've gone. So that's kind of a fun thing to do if you have an opportunity. So I'm moving away from berries and into mushrooms. This is my true passion. I do love berries, but I really love mushrooms. And so this is so important. We saw a couple examples of extremely toxic mushrooms at the beginning of the presentation. Those mushrooms like the nightshade will, and actually even more extreme, will shut down your liver and kidneys rapidly. And they're very dangerous, you know, if you consume them. There is no mushroom that is so toxic that you can't touch it. The issue is you don't want to touch it with your bare hands and then put your hands in your mouth, right? But as long as, you know, you're being careful and you don't eat a mushroom that you haven't properly identified, then you'll be fine. So it is true that wild mushrooms can cause, and wild foods in general, can cause gastrointestinal distress, so a little bit of stomach problems or cramps or like bathroom issues in some people. So even with correct ID, it is recommended to try just a little tiny amount and wait for a few hours to see impact. Related to that, you always, I repeat, always want to thoroughly cook wild mushrooms. Very important. Consuming raw edible mushrooms can be deadly. So even morel mushrooms, that are an edible mushroom. People enjoy eating those. They grow here in the Pacific Northwest. They can be deadly when eaten raw. So very important to cook mushrooms thoroughly. Another mushroom called chicken of the woods, cow for short, is known to cause, pretty severe stomach cramping if it's not really thoroughly cooked, kind of like you would cook fried chicken. It's chicken of the woods. So things to, be mindful of. So you want to pay special attention to the stem or the stipe. So that's like this part of the mushroom that connects it to the ground. The cap, which is like the hat or the top of the mushroom. The gills, or maybe it has ridges, or maybe it has pores. So depending on the type of mushroom, it may have a cap that is very different. You want to look at its color. Sometimes the color of the cap and the stem is the same. Sometimes it's not. It depends on the mushroom. Does it have a bulb? So I talked about that with the Amanita group. It's also called a vulva. So that's the scientific name for the bulb at the base of the mushroom's stem or stipe. Or does it have a veil? So that's that little kind of ring around the stem or stipe that the Amanita group has. So pay attention to those kinds of things because they will help you in your identification. On the left-hand side, these are chanterelles that I harvested. I can't remember what year. And on the right, these are morels mushrooms that I harvested. So as you can see, they're all morels. Some are just bigger and smaller, and some have funky shapes, and some are a little bit, they're all a little bit different. Okay, so we'll start with morels. So these are going to be found in the early spring. And mushrooms, generally, the seasons for mushrooms are going to be really fall and spring are the main seasons. Now, in the summer, if we have a year where there's a lot of rain, like last year we had a lot of rain, then you can find mushrooms that would normally be present in the fall, right? They're going to come early because of the rain. Or if you have a winter that's really mild and you have a lot of rain, then maybe these spring mushrooms are going to start popping earlier. There are some mushrooms that you can find kind of year round, especially if you're in what's called a microclimate. So an area where it's pretty temperate, you don't have extreme heat and extreme cold environments. You have some moisture maybe coming in from the Puget Sound or the ocean, like a coastal environment. But morels are going to come back. Well, these are natural morels. And so you can see on the left-hand side here, this is actually a picture of my first ever morel that I found. I was so excited. And I actually found it in gravel, which is kind of funny because I spent all this time trying to figure out where I would be able to find my first morel. And no one ever said you'd find a natural morel in gravel, but I did. And then here's another picture of a morel that I found. And here's two that were kind of right next to one another. I thought that was kind of fun. So natural morels come back year after year in generally the same area. So if you find a natural morel area, that's exciting because you've done your research, you can go back and you can expect to find some mushrooms, which is the fruiting part of the organism. So mushrooms are a fungi. Most of the organism is actually underneath the ground and makes up what's called the mycelium, the network of the mushroom. And you can also find morels that are called burn morels, and those are specifically associated with forest fires the year after fires. We've had some really bad fires this year in the summer. So, if you look at the maps of those fires, it's anticipated that in those areas, when new growth starts forming, you will find morels. Landscape morels, and so those might be associated with like beauty bark or wood chips or other landscaping situations. And I have not personally found or eaten burn morels or landscape morels. Burn morels are, supposedly when you find burn morels, you find lots and lots, like thousands. You look out and they're just everywhere. But the thing about burn morels is that they're not going to just pop up every year, year after year in the same place because it's dependent upon recent fire activity. So natural morels can be found near rivers. They need water, cottonwoods, swampy areas, and I think I cut off my text here. But these things being said, I actually found my first natural morels near maple vine or vine maple trees. And that was not something that I ever researched or learned. I just, that's where they happen to be growing. So you never know with morels. They're a little bit of their own thing. Couple other pictures. They have kind of a honeycombed cap. They do have a hollow stem or stipe. They can be blonde, tan, brown, gray, black in color. There are a number of different specific types of morels. So this is kind of a broad category, and within it there are lots of kinds. But one thing that's important to note is the cap of the morels is connected to the stem or the stipe. So there is a connection here. It's kind of hard to see from that picture. But if you find something that doesn't have a connection, then it's not a morel. So we can kind of take a look at this pop quiz. Before I share the answers, I'll give you a moment to think about, is it a morel? Is it not a morel? Maybe you have your ideas. They are 3 different kinds of mushrooms. All right, so on the left-hand side, this is a group called Gyrometra. And so this is not a morel. You can see it looks kind of similar. It has this wavy convoluted cap, but this is not the same as the honeycombed cap. And this is a different group of mushroom. This one will make you sick. It'll give you gastrointestinal distress. It's not gonna kill you if you accidentally ate one, but it's not gonna make you feel good. This one is a morel. So this one is a morel, and if we were to cut it in half, we would see that on the inside, it's not cottony, it's completely hollow. There's nothing inside. It's hollow, kind of like we saw in this picture. See how it's hollow inside? This is a morel. And this one here, it's not a morel. This is a mushroom that's called Verpa. And so here in the Northwest, that's the genus group is Verpa. We have Verpa conica and Verpa bohemica. I am not sure off the top of my head which one this might be, but Verpa, some people eat them. I think that some people have, experienced gastrointestinal distress if they eat them, even when cooked thoroughly. I think there are so many really delicious, choice edible mushrooms in Washington state that I wouldn't personally choose to eat this one because there are so many other really nice mushrooms. Okay, so chanterelles, this is my favorite kind of mushroom. So really important, they have ridges, not gills, that run down the stem or the stipe. You can kind of see that here. And one of my favorite characteristics of these mushrooms is that they truly peel like string cheese, like a mozzarella cheese stick. You can kind of see it starting to peel here in this photo on the left-hand side. The color can range from yellow to tan to kind of, I don't know if I would say orangey, but a little bit, to white. And so this picture on the right-hand side, this is a white chanterelle. This is probably the largest white chanterelle that I've found. And I love white chanterelles because they smell like apricot jam. It's like even just like in the vicinity of them, you can smell like this very sweet apricot jam. It's pretty interesting. Chanterelles have a nutty kind of flavor, like a very meaty, nutty, rich flavor. Unlike some other mushrooms that maybe don't taste like a whole lot and they'll taste like whatever you add to the dish. And so these are great. They are not hollow like the morels. They have a solid stem or stipe. So they grow in established forests. You want to look for hardwood, moss, ferns. Chanterelles, like every mushroom, they need rain, and they often grow in the duff. So when I say duff, I'm talking about like this kind of stuff. And sometimes you have to kind of like pull it back to see the chanterelles. Summer chanterelles, we do have chanterelles that come, as I found them, as early as June. They begin to pop on the coast because there's that moisture that's just always present from the Pacific. I keep mixing up all my P words, not Puget Sound, not Pacific Northwest, the Pacific Ocean, as early as June. And then mountain chanterelles, so if you're going to go like in the mountains, like off of Interstate 90, those are going to pop a little later in the fall when we have more rain. So we've had a lot of great rain recently, so that is going to help with us. Pop quiz, is this a chanterelle? So I have 2 different pictures here. Give you a minute to think about it. So the one on the left is a chanterelle. Kind of has a different looking shape, but we can see it has ridges and not gills. It's hard to tell from the picture, but I could peel the stem or the stipe like a block of string cheese. It's going to have that nutty apricot smell. So all the characteristics that are true for chanterelles. This one is not. So if we were to take a measuring tool and measure the depth of those true gills, those are true gills, you would be able to see that that depth is significantly greater than this depth of these ridges. So that's what I mean by true gills versus ridges. Ridges are shallow, just a little variation. And gills are a much deeper, right, difference. They're much more pronounced. Another thing to notice is, do you see how there's like a concave dip in the top of this mushroom, right? Chanterelles don't have that. So that's not a characteristic that's true for chanterelles. If I were to try to peel this mushroom, it's not going to peel like string cheese with little tiny pieces that peel off. Okay, so yellowfoot, winter chanterelles, these are kind of fun because a lot of chanterelle, or a lot of mushrooms aren't available in the winter time to go and forage for, and this is one that you can find in the winter. I found them as late as February or March, so that's kind of fun. They are actually not chanterelles, which is the Chanterelles group. They are actually in a group called Craterelles. They used to be considered Cantharellus, and then that scientific classification has actually changed in time. So yellowfoot can be found in the same area as chanterelles, but much later in the season. And so here's some information about time. Adult yellowfoot are smaller than adult chanterelles. So the cap diameter is 1 to 2 inches versus in chanterelles, oh my goodness, they can be massive. They can be 7 or 8 inches or even bigger depending on how much rain you've had and where you're looking. Have a hollow stem or stipe. So this is not like in chanterelles. So this is different, right? So it's hollow, kind of like it was hollow for the morels. They can be more brown, like the Craterelles tubiformis, so that's a specific species, or they can be more yellow, like the Craterelles ignicolor, and so that's a specific species. So that's where that that word, right, yellowfoot, comes from, the foot meaning the stem or the stipe. So like chanterelles, though, yellowfoot have ridges and not gills. So let's take a look. So here are some that I've harvested. So you can see this is very distinctly, more yellow on the foot. So yellowfoot. And if we look, it's kind of hard to tell from this picture being so oblong like that, but these are ridges and not gills. They don't peel like string cheese, but their stem or stipe is hollow. And this is the environment in which you might find them. Hedgehogs, these are fun. Hedgehog mushrooms. They have spikes or spines under their caps, as you can see here. This is a hedgehog I found very early summer when I was kind of scoping to see how things were growing. And they grow in the same area as chanterelles, they can grow in the same area as yellowfoot. They look similar to chanterelles when viewed from the top. It's only when you kind of pull it out of the ground and flip it over that you see those spines or spikes and aha. It's not a chanterelle. Those are not ridges. Those are spines or spikes. Oysters, another mushroom that is very prolific, so very easy to find, I think, in this area because we have so much rain. And oysters grow on downed, so they've fallen, or decaying, or even sometimes standing, but they're dead, alder trees. And one thing I would recommend doing, and I don't know if I put a picture of that in here, but if you go online and you look up a picture of alder tree cones, you'll often find them on the ground, and that's a good indication, that's a good way to know, like, oh, there must be alder trees right around me, and that will help you in your tree identification. So the colors for oysters can range from white to gray to tan to pinkish, but they do grow in clusters like this. So you can see this is a beautiful cluster that I found in the spring of this year. And this is a set of clusters growing on a tree. And so those are fun to prepare in different ways. I have some different examples. Sometimes if they're really big, I will boil them. And once I've boiled them and washed them off, I'll chop them up and put them in a bag with some oil and some spices and a marinade of some kind. You could do like a teriyaki, really whatever flavors you would find interesting, and let that marinate in the fridge for 24 plus hours. And then you can put them in a dehydrator and you can actually make mushroom jerky, so vegan jerky, which is pretty cool and very delicious. So green things, last part of our presentation. So there are many green edible things that are not listed here. I'm going to focus on some of the more common or easy to identify, and this is going to be fairly quick. And you can always message me if you have questions or want to learn more. Wild lettuce is a little bit bitter. It can be eaten raw or cooked. So I'm just gonna fast forward so you can kind of see what that looks like. So here's some wall lettuce that I foraged from pretty much any hike I can think of. Off of Interstate 90, you can find wall lettuce, and it almost looks like dandelion greens, doesn't it? And you can see it kind of grows from this central point, right? So here it is growing in the ground. And you wanna clip it when it's young, when it hasn't bolted yet. So if you have a garden at home and you have like kale and chard and some other things growing, you might know that sometimes if you don't trim it back, you know, it'll bolt, and it has this big shoot that it sends up, and then it kind of gets bitter. And so that's what happens with the wall lettuce. So you want to get it when it's young. The next one is miner's lettuce. And this one is best eaten raw. I've cooked it before and it kind of turns, you know, I say swampy. So not my favorite, but in a salad, raw is quite nice. Maybe not a whole salad of miner's lettuce, but you know, you could supplement some garden greens with some miner's lettuce. And this is what it looks like on the left-hand side. The one on the right, this is my favorite. This one is really nice. These are called sea beans. And I'm just gonna go back to my first slide. They're coastal, so they really need lots of moisture. They have a salt and pepper crunch, and you can eat them fresh. Oh, I need to change this. It should say fresh or cooked. So fresh or cooked. I like to sometimes make, like I'll chop up some sea beans and I'll mix, you know, like an egg and some panko breadcrumbs and some herbs and maybe a little bit of Parmesan or whatever. And then I'll form like little patties, like meatballs, but with the sea beans, and then I'll bake them in the oven. Really good. Or I just eat them like this, like as if it was edamame or something, like just fresh, like as if it was just a shelled edamame, but really delicious. Okay, so let's practice. Name that wild edible. I'm going to give you a moment to think about it. So let's start with this on the left-hand side, the white colored mushroom. Give you a minute to think about it. Yeah, those are oyster mushrooms. Okay, there's only 2 of them, but anybody know what those are? Morel mushrooms. And over here on the right-hand side, what do you think? What could this green thing be? Wall lettuce. And on the right, in the basket, these colorful compound berries are called salmon berries. Yeah. Okay, so last page, just some suggested resources. If you're like, oh yeah, this is kind of interesting, I'd love to learn a little bit more about how I can harvest what's growing, you know, in Washington State, the place where I live. These are some books that I recommend that you might find interesting. So I'll leave this screen up for a moment in case you want to take a picture of it, in case you want to do a little quick search. One of the books that's probably my favorite is this one. I have that written down, but this is Plants of the Pacific Northwest Coast. This is a pretty cohesive book. So it's a good overview. So if you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm mostly interested in mushrooms or mostly interested in berries or mostly, you know, this is a little bit of everything. So this is a nice book. And I highly recommend the top book. I mean, all the mushroom books are good, but my favorite mushroom book would be the top one. So All That the Rain Promises and More. All right, so thanks for joining me today for the workshop on Pacific Northwest wild edibles. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. And the reason I chose to do this is because I'm very passionate about wild foods and being outside and out in nature. And my favorite thing about the outdoors is that they're for everyone. So feel free to send me a message if you have a question or connect with me on Schoology about this presentation if you're curious. Otherwise, have a great day and I'll see you later.